Your moral judgment may be a little bit questionable when you owe the devil 10,000 souls. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for joining me. Today I have a review of two novels from the Splatter Western series. They are both by Wile E. The first is called The Magpie Coffin, and then its sequel, For a Few Souls More. This is part of my ongoing project to read all of the novels and novellas that are part of the Splatter Western series. The Splatter Western series is a collection of westerns that are combined with horror and splatterpunk elements. It is published by Dead Sky Publishing, and almost all of the stories in the collection are standalone. By the end of 2024, there should be 23 novels and novellas that are published, and of those 23, these two are a pair that go together, and there's one other pair that go together, but the rest are all written by different authors, and they're entirely standalone, so there's no need to read them in order or to read any of them together. Yet, I have this ongoing project of wanting to read all of them, and The Magpie Coffin was actually the first one published in March 2020 of the Splatter Western series, so I'm really glad to have read it because it kind of sets the tone for the whole series, and that tone is violent and dark and gruesome and bloody, and it was great. You know, both of these stories are set in the Old West, late 19th century. Our main character is a bastard. You know, there's nothing redeeming about him at all. And both of these novels are revenge tales, but the second one is kind of flipped on its head. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But for the first one, The Magpie Coffin, we follow Salem Covington. He's our main character. And like I said, you find out he is just a bastard. And part of the reason he's a bastard is he made a deal with the devil, he and his brother both, and they received these magical guns, and as long as they have these guns, they cannot be killed by any other gun. In fact, the only gun that can harm him is the one that was given to his brother, and the only gun that can harm his brother is the one that was given to him. But the cost of these guns is 10,000 souls, so they owe the devil 10,000 souls, and he has no problem, paying. And the gun itself whispers to him, and it invites him to madness and murder, so he is overwhelmed all the time. By his first instinct is death and blood and destruction. Not only does he have this magical gun that was given to him by the devil, but he has learned and practiced the different occult practices and different mystical sciences from anywhere he can find in the country. So he trains with voodoo priestesses, and he trains with different Native Americans, including the Comanche. And that is the heart of this story, is he finds out that his teacher, his Comanche teacher named Dead Bear, was murdered. And the heart of this story is him avenging his teacher. So he is, in some ways, your very stereotypical outlaw bad guy who doesn't care about anyone but himself and will kill you before he thinks about you. Yet he doesn't only have a gun, he has all these mystical powers at his disposal. And so he's incredibly feared, he's ruthless, everyone knows his name, his face has a brand right under the eye, so you can't mistake him for who he is. So the first novel, Magpie Coffin, follows him trying to enact revenge for the murder of his teacher, this Comanche shaman. He goes and he finds his teacher's body, desecrated, murdered body, and he puts it in a coffin, which he takes with him in his stagecoach. And the body may or may not continue to talk to him through his journeys. So you have all of these going on. He communes with the dead, and he is trying to enact revenge. But when he left his teacher, he left in a bad way. Every teacher he trains with, he leaves by destroying that relationship because he perverts every magic system, every medicine system, every ritual or mystical art that he's taught. He perverts it because he combines it with others and he only cares about himself. He's selfish, he's violent, he doesn't care about anyone else. So he doesn't have good relations with any of his teachers, and yet he still respects all of them. And so it's this interesting balance of respect and fear. As he's on his journey of revenge, he ends up essentially taking a hostage who he forces to help him. Because even though he is a ruthless killer, people know that he's a man of his word. And so he takes this guy and he says, look, if you help me, then when we're done, when I've finished enacting revenge, I'll give you some gold and you can go free. If you don't help me, then I will kill you right now. Those are the guy's options. So you almost have this kind of buddy cop situation where the two of them are traveling across the country to try to avenge his teacher. And the group of people that murdered his teacher, there are 5 or 6 of them, have all separated. So you have a bunch of different incidents as they have to meet with all of them and enact their revenge. And as you can imagine, none of these are good people either. There aren't really any good people in these stories. There's nothing but degenerates and violence. And on that note, these stories have every trigger warning you can imagine. There is obviously blood and gore and violence. There's harm to children. There's harm to animals. There is sexual assault. There is desecration of dead bodies. And now these aren't all things our main character does, but they're things that happen in the space of the novels. Go into any of these stories realizing what you are going into, because they're not for the faint of heart in that regard. But ultimately, at its heart, this first story is a revenge story, and we're going across the country trying to enact revenge and overcoming obstacles in the process of doing that. The second story is also a revenge story. So the second story is called For a Few Souls More. And what it does is it flips the script. So instead of our main character, Salem, seeking out revenge, this story starts with someone else seeking revenge on Salem, because Salem has killed his son and left him maimed and mutilated, which makes sense. He's killed thousands of people. Of course, there are going to be others out there that are gunning for him. And so in this story, he is on his back foot the whole time. He has to defend himself. And in order to do that, he's trying to cut off the threat at the head. So he again has to travel across the country to meet up with the person who is orchestrating this revenge tale. Because this person who is seeking out revenge did the same thing Salem did, where he relied upon mystical arts and he maybe made a deal with the devil, maybe made a deal with death itself in order to gain powers that would allow him the capacity to kill Salem. So you have a match, you have a rival who actually can cause harm to him. Salem isn't invincible. And even in the first novel, he isn't invincible. He just can't be killed by gunshot, but he can be stabbed, he can be beaten, he can suffer all sorts of torture and abuse, and he goes through a lot of that in both of these novels. In the second novel, he ends up collecting a posse of people. None of them trust him, none of them like him, but they all have their own motives for wanting to go on this journey with him. So instead of just him and a buddy, as it is in the first novel, he has a whole group around him, but they all have their own alliances and their own reasons for being part of this narrative, as it would be. You do learn more about him in the second novel. You learn about where he came from, some of his childhood, what made him the way he is, at least to some extent, and it never excuses him, but it does give you some more context. So there is character growth, which is interesting to see because it wasn't necessary in either of these novels. These could just be brute force revenge novels, but instead you have some complexity to these characters, which is actually really refreshing, and it makes these stories more readable, and it makes the transition from one bloody violent scene to another bloody violent scene go more smoothly because there's actually some emotional investment. You never really root for the main character because he is such a bastard. He's not a good guy. They don't ever try to pretend he's an anti-hero. He's never doing things for the right reasons. Even when he's seeking out revenge, he almost always is the cause of the problem, So you never are rooting for him, yet his story is compelling and it draws you in. It's really well written. It's really well crafted. The pacing is really strong. You don't want to put the books down. And even though the characters are somewhat stereotypical, they also have heart, they have emotion, they feel genuine, they feel realistic given the confines of this world, and the amount of magical ability, supernatural ability, or occult ability is used effectively. It's never like he can magic his way out of any situation. He still faces peril, being the kind of main protagonist, whether he's likable or not. You kind of expect him to get through to the end of the novel at the very least. And so because of that, you don't expect him to, die in the third chapter, let's say. But he does face peril. You do feel his mortality in both books, but especially in the second book when he is the object that is being gunned for by this outside forces. Both of these novels are really exciting. They aren't like monumental game changers. They don't bring a whole lot of like emotional depth. But what they do bring is a really good fun time, a really strong mashup of occult horror with a very typical Western genre setting. They feel genuine to the Western motif. They don't ever feel like they're play acting as a Western. They just feel like they've taken something in the Western genre and turned it up so it's a little louder, a little more violent, a little extra across every possible parameter. They're fun. They are quick to read. I had a great time reading them. And if you're at all interested in the Splatter Western series, I think it's great to read these because they set the tone for what this series can and will be. And in other novels, there's other different types of genre blending happening. So that not every book in the series follows this formula, but this really does lay the groundwork for what kind of an exciting mashup you can get when you take horror, splatterpunk, and Western and you mix them all together. You get this really tasty morsel that once you pick it up, you don't want to put it down. So what do you think? Have you read any of the Splatter Western series? Are you following along with me on this journey as I've read more and more of them? Let me know down in the comments. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. But for now, I'll say thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves. Take care of each other. and go slowly.